Chapter 1. The Onset of Darkness. Episode 1. The Hidden Strike. The drone's monotonous hum was lost in the clear Yemeni sky, an invisible alarm for the man walking beneath the palm trees. Dr. Ramin Yamani, a scientist whose past Western intelligence services had entwined with the shadows of terrorism, reviewed his last notes. A gentle breeze rustled the paper pages, oblivious to the storm about to break. Across the world, in the darkened rooms of headquarters, fingers hovered over fire buttons. The intelligence was precise. Ramin Yamani, a potential threat, had to be eliminated. A covert operation, leaving no trace. Moments later, hell rained from the sky. A peaceful home amidst the palm groves was engulfed in an explosion. Smoke and fire billowed into the sky, and in the silence that followed, nothing remained but ashes and shattered fragments. Ramin's family also fell victim to this silent strike. But they had made a mistake. There was a survivor. Kian, Ramin's elder brother. A seasoned veteran, hardened by years in Yemen's tumultuous politics. A man for whom the death of his younger brother and his family left a deep wound on his heart and planted a seed of revenge in his soul. Years ago, when Ramin was young and passionate, Kian had guided him down a certain path. He believed Yemen needed modern weapons to maintain its independence and power. He had encouraged the talented Ramin to apply his scientific genius to this cause, unaware that one day this very knowledge would become a tool for a global catastrophe. Kian himself had been unable to have children, and had poured all his love and affection into his younger brother. Now that love had transformed into burning rage and hatred. Kian had always been a political and religious man, but the horrific death of his family intensified these aspects within him 100-fold. Where there might have once been a glimmer of possibility for negotiation with enemies, there was now no compromise. He trusted no one, not even his old allies in Yemen. How had the United States learned about his brother's secret project? This question gnawed at him like a worm. In secret, Kian sought out his brother's last achievements. He knew Ramin had been working on a dangerous project before his death. Using his influence and covert connections, he gathered the remnants of Ramin's research. He did not intend to follow his brother's path, but wanted to use the very weapon that took his life for revenge. He conducted hidden experiments, enhanced the virus his brother had created, making it stronger and more lethal. He did this in secrecy. Even his closest associates were unaware of his sinister plan. Kian was no longer just seeking revenge. He believed a great cleansing was necessary, not only for his brother's blood, but for his own ideology and for the future he envisioned. Episode 2. Seed of Death. The appointed day arrived. Kian, with a heart full of rage and unwavering faith in his goal, issued the order to attack. Through a network of infiltrators, and using highly secretive methods, he released the enhanced virus in strategic locations across America and Europe. The first signs were vague. A few cases of severe and unusual flu, high fevers, and debilitating headaches. But the speed of spread was terrifying. Within days, hospitals were overflowing with people exhibiting similar symptoms. Doctors were bewildered. No medication worked. Then, the real hell began. The infected experienced severe behavioral changes, uncontrollable violence, an urge to bite and tear. They were no longer human, but creatures thirsting for blood and flesh. The virus was turning its victims into savage zombies. Cities fell one after another. Panic and chaos spread everywhere. The U.S. government's attempts to quarantine and control the situation were futile. The virus's spread outpaced every effort to contain it. The military took to the streets but made no headway against the flood of infected creatures. Grim news arrived from across the country. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Major cities fell one after another into a deadly silence, overrun by an army of the walking dead. Screams, gunfire, and terrified moans were the last sounds heard from these centers of civilization. America, the most powerful nation in the world, had transformed into an endless battlefield within weeks. Flames shot from tall buildings. Streets were littered with abandoned cars and corpses. Civilization was collapsing. Episode 3. The Fall of Order. 3 days had passed since the darkness began. Panic and chaos still raged in American cities, but in secure underground shelters, desperate attempts to understand and counter the catastrophe were underway. In one such shelter, an online conference room had been set up, the last bastion of communication among the remnants of power. The president's tired and distraught face appeared on the large screen. Beside him were the anxious faces of the Secretary of Health and several senior officials. On the other side of the screen, dozens of scientists and medical experts from across the country stared pleadingly at the president. The FBI director, with a grim and serious face, and a senior army general, were also among those present. Dr. Lee, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, spoke, his voice echoing in the room. Mr. President, the situation is rapidly deteriorating. We are facing an unknown pathogen that is incredibly aggressive and contagious. Victims develop severe neurological changes within hours and turn into violent, cannibalistic creatures. The Secretary of Health continued, his voice trembling. Within 3 days, we have witnessed the complete collapse of the healthcare system in many states. Hospitals are overflowing with infected individuals, and medical staff are losing control due to a lack of equipment and an overwhelming number of patients. Unfortunately, the death toll is increasing exponentially. The president, trying to maintain his composure, asked, "Tell me, Dr. Lee, do we know where this illness came from? Is there any indication of a deliberate attack?" Dr. Lee hesitated before answering. "Mr. President, currently, we have no evidence of a terrorist attack or a specific origin for this virus. Its speed and widespread dissemination are unprecedented, and we are investigating all possibilities, from a natural mutation to—" His voice trailed off. The senior Army general stated firmly, "Mr. President, we must take more decisive action. My proposal is to completely quarantine infected areas and, if necessary, use military force to prevent further spread. Perhaps it might even be necessary to—" The Secretary of Health's voice rose in protest. "No! Mr. President, I strongly object to this proposal. Bombing American citizens, even if infected, is a horrific crime. We cannot resort to such violence. We must find other solutions." The debate in the room intensified. The president, his face crumpled and distraught, tried to restore silence. He was caught between military recommendations for decisive action and ethical warnings against civilian casualties. They did not know what they were facing, and every decision could have irreversible consequences. Kian's name was not mentioned. There was no trace of an organized attack, just an unprecedented and unidentifiable catastrophe that had pushed them to the brink of annihilation. Suddenly, a military advisor rushed into the room and handed a paper to the president. "Mr. President, new reports have arrived. The situation within the cities has become extremely tense. It appears that the panic caused by the outbreak has led to scattered riots. There are reports of looting, street clashes, and even attacks on some police stations and small military bases. People are arming themselves, and control is rapidly slipping from the hands of security forces." The president's face contorted, and his hands trembled. This news was another blow to the crisis. Not only was a deadly disease destroying the country, but social order was also collapsing. Popular uprisings, especially in these critical circumstances, made the government forces' task much harder. Previously caught between military advice for suppression and ethical warnings to preserve civilian lives, he now faced a new threat: the complete loss of governmental authority. Despair surged in his expression. They still did not know what they were facing, and this uncertainty deepened the fear and chaos. Were these riots merely due to public panic, or was some mysterious force hidden behind this unrest? The unanswered questions magnified the burden of decision-making on the president. The president, his face showing increasing exasperation and pressure, broke the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. "The situation is clear. We are facing an unprecedented crisis in our nation's history. A deadly and unknown disease is spreading, our healthcare system is on the verge of collapse, and now we are witnessing popular uprisings and the loss of order in cities." He paused, looking at the anxious faces of those present. "Therefore, I am declaring a national state of emergency right now. There is no longer time for theoretical discussions and prolonged disagreements. We must immediately form a united front and take action to confront this threat." The president continued, "To this end, a special crisis task force will be formed, responsible for coordinating all government efforts to combat this catastrophe. General, you are responsible for coordinating military and security forces to restore order and quarantine infected areas. But I emphasize, any use of force must be carried out with the utmost precision and with the lives of citizens in mind." He gave the general a serious look. Then he turned to Dr. Lee and the FBI director. "Dr. Lee, Mr. Director, your immediate priority is to find the origin of this disease and its exact nature. All scientific and intelligence resources of the country must be mobilized for this purpose. I need clear and quick answers. We cannot fight this enemy without understanding it." Despite the president's explicit orders, a shadow of doubt and disagreement remained on the faces of some officials. The Secretary of Health said in a quiet but firm voice, "Mr. President, I am still concerned about the consequences of widespread military action. We must make every effort to find non-violent solutions." The president ran a hand over his forehead in exasperation. "I understand your concerns, Madam Secretary, but we don't have much time. This task force is mandated to examine all aspects of the issue and find the best solution to preserve the lives of our citizens and the survival of our nation. The first meeting of the task force will be held tomorrow morning. Be ready, all of you." The meeting ended with the distressed faces of the officials. A sense of urgency and the need for action permeated the air, but fundamental disagreements on how to deal with the crisis persisted. The president, with the heavy burden of responsibility on his shoulders, knew that difficult and fateful decisions lay ahead, and the future of civilization would depend on these decisions. Chapter 1: The Onset of Darkness. Episode 3: The Fall of Order. The morning after the emergency meeting, a heavy silence hung over headquarters. No news came from the presidential bunker. All communication lines were cut, and no information about the president's status was available. In the Situation Room, the senior Army general and the FBI director gathered around a table, their faces anxious and distraught. The meeting was about to begin, but the president's seat was empty. "No news?" the general asked, his voice strained. The FBI director shook his head negatively. "Unfortunately not, General. All our attempts to contact the bunker have been unsuccessful." Just then, the phone on the table rang. A crackling voice came from the other end. "Call from the Secret Service team." The FBI director picked up the receiver and listened intently. His face darkened moment by moment. After a few moments of silence, he put the phone down and said in a trembling voice, "Attack. Zombie attack on the president's bunker. Intense fighting. High casualties. President and 4 others. Fleeing to an unknown location. Immediate evacuation requested." Upon hearing the news, the general slammed his fist on the table. "Damn it, we must act now." He turned to the FBI director and asked, "What forces do we have available?" The FBI director quickly replied, "A team of special forces from the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier, commanded by General Thomas Ford, are stationed at the base. They are our best option right now." "Deploy them immediately," the general ordered. "Inform General Thomas. He has been called to save the life of the President of the United States of America." A few hours later, new information arrived from the president's team. They were currently sheltering in a store in the zombie-infested city. The situation was dire, and time was running out. The general, reviewing city maps, informed the president's team of a tall building with a helicopter landing pad on the roof. They had to survive and reach that building by 3 p.m., when the helicopters would arrive in the area. To divert the zombies' attention from the president's team's path, the general ordered several fighter jets to bomb areas of the city teeming with zombies. The goal was to draw their attention away from the president and his team so they could reach the safe building. The bombings were somewhat effective. The president's team managed to clear their path and reached close to the target building without direct engagement with the zombies. The 54th floor. They reached the building's entrance and, with great difficulty, opened the door and entered. It was pitch black. The power was out, and they had to use the emergency stairwell. As they ascended the stairs and reached the middle floors, a voice on the radio informed them that the helicopters were approaching. Simultaneously with the approaching sound of 5 helicopters, the zombies, who had been driven away from the area by the bombing, were attracted by the sound and rushed towards the building. The zombies' speed was significantly greater than that of the president and his exhausted team. The general ordered 1 helicopter to land directly on the rooftop and instructed the other 4 helicopters to provide heavy fire, preventing the zombies from reaching the president. The sound of rapid gunfire echoed through the air, but the number of zombies increased by the minute. They swarmed madly upwards from doors, walls, and stairwells to reach the helicopter on the rooftop. It was an unending struggle. Zombies even jumped out of the building's windows to grab the low-flying helicopters. A frantic, zombie-like attempt. Suddenly, the zombies managed to reach one of the helicopters that was firing at them and brought it down. At that moment, the president and his companions reached the rooftop. Zombies also swarmed onto the rooftop after them. The president rushed towards the helicopter and boarded it. The helicopter was taking off when suddenly, several zombies clung to its body. The pilot's attempt to maintain balance was futile. The helicopter crashed violently to the ground and exploded. The President of the United States of America was killed. General Thomas, witnessing this catastrophe, wanted to report the president's death to the crisis headquarters, but then he remembered the crisis headquarters had been destroyed. There was no central command structure. The United States of America had fallen. Episode 4, Battle in the Iron Giant. General Thomas and the survivors approached the massive hull of the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier, aboard boats and small ships. Radio contact reported the spread of the disease and loss of control within the carrier, but they had no choice but to enter. Upon reaching the deck, a horrific scene lay before them. Infected sailors, with hideous faces and savage movements, roamed about. But amidst the chaos, there were signs of resistance. Faint sounds of gunfire could be heard from inside the carrier. The general shouted loudly, "Everyone with a weapon, get ready! We are not alone." At that very moment, from the side corridors of the deck, a group of uninfected sailors, commanded by a young officer named Lieutenant Sarah Wilson, attacked the zombies with their weapons. They had resisted the disease since its initial outbreak on the carrier, and now, with the arrival of the general and his forces, they had been revitalized. "General Ford? Welcome," Lieutenant Wilson said to the general, her face determined. "We tried to stop their advance as much as we could, but their numbers are too great." The general, seeing this organized resistance, felt a renewed spirit. "Lieutenant, put your forces at my disposal. Together, we will clear these abominations from the carrier." The battle on the aircraft carrier turned into a full-scale war. The general's forces on one side and the loyal sailors commanded by Lieutenant Wilson on the other, like two pincers, attacked the zombies. The narrow corridors, vast decks, and labyrinthine rooms of the carrier were scenes of bloody, hand-to-hand combat. Sergeant Peter, fighting alongside the general, bravely risked danger repeatedly. clearing the way for his comrades' advance. Lieutenant Wilson, with her decisive leadership and combat skills, guided her forces against the relentless zombie attacks. It took hours until finally, with the effort and sacrifice of all survivors, vast sections of the carrier were cleared of zombies. Exhaustion and injuries were visible on their faces, but a sense of victory and hope kept them standing. General Thomas, alongside Lieutenant Wilson, stared out at the main deck. The USS Harry S. Truman, despite the damage it had sustained, was still afloat. They had managed to reclaim their last refuge. Chapter 1. The Onset of Darkness. Episode 5. The Call of Survival. After clearing large sections of the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier of zombies, General Thomas and Lieutenant Wilson gathered in the command room. The fatigue from the battle was still evident on their faces, but their eyes reflected a glimmer of hope. "Lieutenant Wilson, you and your people showed incredible bravery in this battle," the general said admiringly. "Without your resistance, our task would have been much harder." Lieutenant Wilson replied humbly, "We just tried to defend our home, General. But we know this isn't the end. We're still in a dangerous world." The general nodded. "You're right, Lieutenant. We achieved a victory, but the war isn't over yet. We must plan for the future. We need to know if there are other survivors out there, in these seas." The general motioned to one of the communications officers. "Sergeant, prepare the carrier's most powerful radio. Lieutenant Williams, I want you in charge of this mission." Lieutenant Williams, a young officer with a serious and determined face, stepped forward. "Yes, General?" "Lieutenant, I want you to use all of the carrier's communication capabilities to search for other survivors," the general ordered. "Other ships, naval bases, any group or individual who might still be alive. We need to know we're not alone." Lieutenant Williams replied firmly. "Understood, General. We will scan all frequencies. I hope someone is on the other end." Days and nights, the crackle of radio waves resonated in the carrier's communication room. Lieutenant Williams and his team patiently and persistently searched for any sign of life. They sent out test messages and listened to every sound that came from across the sea. Hope and despair intertwined many times during this search. Sometimes, there was complete silence, and other times, vague and garbled noises that were impossible to decipher. But General Thomas was determined. He knew that unity and finding other survivors would increase their chances of survival in this savage world. The call of survival had to echo across the ocean. Episode 6. A Signal in the Darkness. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The USS Harry S. Truman, the last mobile bastion of hope amidst a sea of despair, continued its patrol in the open waters. Fuel and ammunition reserves were dwindling, and the morale of the sailors, despite their initial resistance, was starting to erode. The radio silence weighed heavier than anything else on General Thomas and his team. Lieutenant Williams, with eyes red from sleeplessness and fatigue, remained stationed in the communication room. Radio messages were sent continuously and met with silence. Despair, like a chronic illness, slowly seeped into him and his team. Moments earlier, he had decided to check the emergency frequency one last time, a desperate act, more for protocol than actual hope. Suddenly, amidst the endless static, a faint, broken voice was heard. Lieutenant Williams immediately looked up, his eyes wide. With incredible speed, he reached for the controls and amplified the sound. "Is anyone there? Aircraft carrier. Anyone who can hear? This is what's left of the U.S. 7th Fleet. Emergency signal. We need help." The voice was weak and full of noise, but the words were discernible. The 7th Fleet. General Thomas, who was inspecting the situation near the communication room, rushed in upon hearing Lieutenant Williams' excited shout. "Did you find something, Lieutenant?" Lieutenant Williams shouted excitedly. "Yes, General. A signal from the 7th Fleet. They're alive." The general's face, etched with months of worry, suddenly lit up. This was the first good news, the first glimmer of hope, in a long time. "Contact them, Lieutenant. Try to pinpoint their exact location. Any information you can get is important." Lieutenant Williams, with trembling hands but complete focus, began to establish communication with the source of the signal. Stressed and long moments passed in the heavy silence of the communication room. Finally, the connection became more stable. "Harry Truman to 7th Fleet. Respond. What is your name? What is your status?" A tired but hopeful voice replied from the other end. "This is the USS Mitcher from the 7th Fleet. We are near Guam. We're barely holding on. Zombies attacked the ship. We lost a lot of crew. We urgently need medical help, ammunition, and reinforcements." General Thomas went to the sea map and pointed to Guam. It was a long distance, but reachable. "Lieutenant, tell them we're on our way. Tell them the Harry Truman is coming." Lieutenant Williams sent the message. In that moment, fatigue vanished from his face and that of his team, replaced by resolute determination. This wasn't just a signal. It was the call of survival that had been answered. It was hope that had been rekindled. General Thomas knew this was the beginning of a new, dangerous mission, but for the first time in a long time, he felt he was not alone. Episode 7, The Final Alliance. The journey to Guam was an arduous test for the crew of the Harry Truman. They faced sea storms, dwindling supplies, and sick crew members, but the hope of finding other survivors kept them going. Finally, after days of sailing, the aircraft carrier reached the vicinity of Guam Island. The scene before them was heartbreaking. The destroyer USS Mitcher, with a damaged and burnt hull, barely floated on the water. Several lifeboats drifted around it, indicating intense engagements. Thick smoke rose from parts of the destroyer. General Thomas ordered smaller boats to be dispatched to assess the situation on the destroyer. Lieutenant Wilson and Sergeant Peter volunteered for this mission. They cautiously approached the Mitcher and managed to enter the ship through a side corridor. Inside the destroyer, horrific scenes awaited them. Zombie and sailor corpses were scattered in the corridors. But in the command center, a group of survivors, led by Captain Michael Reynolds, was holding out. Captain Reynolds, a middle-aged man with a determined face and tired eyes, immediately approached Lieutenant Wilson and Sergeant Peter upon seeing them. "Are you from the Harry Truman?" "I can't believe it. We thought we were alone," Captain Reynolds said, his voice hoarse. Lieutenant Wilson replied, "Yes, Captain. General Thomas Ford sent us." "How many survivors do you have?" "About 150 of us survived, but many are wounded, and our supplies are running out," Captain Reynolds said with despair. "The situation is dire. We could be attacked again at any moment." Upon Lieutenant Wilson and Sergeant Peter's return to the Harry Truman, General Thomas immediately ordered the start of rescue operations. The Mitcher's crew was transferred to the Harry Truman, and the wounded received medical attention. Supplies and ammunition were distributed among the survivors. In an emergency meeting held in the Harry Truman's command room, General Thomas, Lieutenant Wilson, and Captain Reynolds gathered. The alliance of these two groups sparked hope for the formation of a stronger force. "We managed to eliminate a lot of zombies, but this is just a temporary relief," Captain Reynolds said. "This virus is still spreading, and we have no solution for it." General Thomas nodded. "That's right, Captain. We need more information. We need to find out where this virus came from and how to stop it. Before the government fell, scientists were researching this. Maybe we can find their trail." Captain Reynolds said with a slight hesitation. "Where were they? If they're alive, how do we find them?" "The Center for Viral Research had a top-secret underground facility in Arizona," General Thomas replied firmly. "If anyone managed to survive and work on this virus, they would be there. We must go to Arizona." Captain Reynolds looked at Lieutenant Wilson. "Another dangerous mission," Lieutenant Wilson replied decisively. "If we want a chance to survive, we have no other choice. We have to find answers." General Thomas looked at the map. The journey to Arizona meant entering the heart of an infected continent. This was their biggest challenge yet, but with the alliance of the two fleets, they were now stronger than ever. The call of survival, this time, was guiding them towards the source of this darkness. This was their last hope, the final battle to save civilization.